Captain Sarah Reed's heart pounded in her chest as she maneuvered through the digital battlefield. Her visor displayed a barrage of incoming threats, hostile drones swarming from every direction. With a flick of her wrist, she directed her squad to counter, their movements precise, their tactics flawless. But just as she anticipated victory, the simulation stuttered. The crisp, clean edges of the virtual world blurred, then shattered, plunging her into an all-consuming void. Before Sarah could react, she found herself standing in a cavernous chamber, its walls a seamless blend of metal and shadows. The air was unnervingly still, carrying a faint, acrid tang that set her nerves on edge. She spun around, scanning for an exit, a threat, anything. The silence was broken by a voice, deep and cold, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "We have observed your species for some time, Captain Reed." Sarah's muscles tensed, every instinct screaming at her to fight or flee. But where to? And against what? "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the dread coiling in her stomach. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and clad in armor that seemed to absorb the dim light. Its face was hidden behind a featureless mask, but its presence radiated a chilling authority. "I am Valkar, commander of the Zelkar Dominion. You are here because your kind possesses a quality we lack, a capacity for chaos, for unpredictability." Sarah's mind raced, struggling to piece together this surreal situation. "Chaos? What do you want with me?" Valkar took a step closer, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "Our species thrives on order and precision, yet we are facing an enemy that defies logic, an entity that thrives in the chaos we cannot comprehend. We need a mind like yours, a human mind, to defeat them." Sarah narrowed her eyes, suspicion flaring. "And if I refuse?" Valkar's silence was more telling than any threat. After a moment, he spoke again, his tone colder. "If you refuse, we will find another, and when our enemies are done with us, they will come for your world next. You have no choice, Captain." The weight of his words settled over her like a suffocating blanket. The idea of working with these aliens, who clearly viewed her as nothing more than a tool, was abhorrent. But the thought of what might happen if she refused, of Earth being the next target, was even worse. She had spent her life defending her planet from threats she could understand. This was something entirely different, a threat from a dimension of chaos that she could barely grasp. "What do you need me to do?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with resignation. Valkar's head tilted slightly, a gesture that might have been approval. "You will come with us. You will see the enemy, and you will devise a strategy. Succeed, and your world will be spared. Fail, and it will burn along with the rest of us." A cold chill settled over Sarah's heart as she followed Valkar out of the chamber and into the unknown. The stakes had never been higher. She was no longer just a soldier fighting for survival. She was humanity's last hope against an enemy that defied all reason. As the doors sealed shut behind them, the echo of her footsteps faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the alien ship. Sarah steeled herself, pushing down the fear gnawing at her insides. There was no turning back now. The real battle had just begun. Into the abyss. Sarah Reed stood in the cramped cockpit of the Zelkar scout ship, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the console. The alien pilot beside her, a silent, calculating figure named Zoker, manipulated the controls with a fluid precision that belied the tension in the air. Through the view screen, the vast expanse of space stretched out before them, but it was no ordinary void. They were approaching the abyss, a region of space where the very fabric of reality was said to unravel. Zoker's voice, clipped and emotionless, broke the silence. "We are nearing the entry point. Prepare yourself, human." Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the swirling maelstrom that loomed ahead. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, an ominous vortex of shifting colors and distorted light, where space seemed to fold in on itself. She could feel a faint pressure building in her skull, as if the universe itself were straining under the weight of its own chaos. "What exactly are we facing in there?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "The entities that dwell within the abyss defy all conventional understanding," Zoker replied, his hands moving with practiced ease across the console. They are beings of pure chaos, born from the instability of this region. They attack without warning, without pattern. We have lost many ships and warriors to their unpredictability. Sarah's mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of the challenge before her. She had faced countless threats in her military career, but this was different. This was a battle against an enemy that operated on principles completely alien to her understanding. She was out of her depth, and she knew it. But there was no room for doubt. If she faltered, Earth would be next in the abyss path of destruction. Steeling herself, she focused on the task at hand. What's our plan? Zoker glanced at her, his black eyes inscrutable. Our directive is to study the enemy's behavior, to find a pattern in the chaos. You, human, are here because your species has a unique capacity for improvisation. We need that unpredictable element to survive. Sarah swallowed hard. The responsibility felt like a lead weight in her chest. And if we don't find a pattern? Then we perish, Zoker said simply, as if discussing the weather. The ship shuddered violently as they crossed the threshold into the abyss. Alarms blared, and the cockpit lights flickered ominously. The viewscreen filled with a kaleidoscope of chaotic images, twisting, writhing forms that defied comprehension. Sarah's stomach lurched as gravity fluctuated wildly, pulling her in every direction at once. Stabilize the ship, she shouted, gripping the console to steady herself. I'm trying. Zoker's calm demeanor cracked, replaced by a fierce concentration as he fought to keep the ship under control. The chaos is stronger than anticipated. We may not last long. Sarah's mind raced, searching for a solution. Her eyes darted across the alien controls, trying to make sense of the alien technology. She needed to think fast, to do what she did best, improvise. Redirect power to the forward thrusters. We need to push through this turbulence. Zoker hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to taking orders from a human, but he complied. The ship lurched forward, cutting through the chaotic currents like a spear through water. For a moment, it seemed to be working. The wild fluctuations began to ease, the ship gaining a semblance of stability. But then, without warning, a massive, shadowy form materialized in front of them. It was a nightmare made flesh, a shifting mass of darkness that lashed out with tendrils of pure energy. The ship shuddered under the impact, alarms blaring in a deafening cacophony. We can't fight that! Zoker yelled, his voice tinged with something Sarah hadn't heard from him before, fear. Sarah's instincts kicked in. We don't fight it. We outmaneuver it. Use the chaos against it. Fly erratically, make it impossible for it to predict our movements. Zoker's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. He threw the ship into a series of wild, unpredictable maneuvers, darting in every direction as the chaotic entity pursued them. The cockpit became a blur of motion, the viewscreen filled with flashes of light and shadow as they dodged and weaved through the maelstrom. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as the ship twisted and turned, but she held on, her mind locked on survival. The creature lashed out again and again, but each time, Zoker managed to evade its strikes by mere inches. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the entity shrieked in frustration and dissolved back into the chaos from which it had emerged. The ship burst through the other side of the abyss, emerging into the relative calm of open space. Sarah slumped against the console, her heart pounding in her chest. They had made it. Barely. Zoker turned to her, his expression unreadable. Your plan worked, human. You have proven yourself useful. Sarah nodded, too exhausted to muster a response. But in the back of her mind, a new realization took root. They had survived this encounter, but the abyss was vast, and its threats were far from over. If they were to defeat this enemy, she would need to harness every ounce of human ingenuity and adaptability she possessed. The real battle was just beginning. The heart of the abyss. Sarah's breath steadied as the scout ship's engines hummed in the relative calm of open space. The tension from their encounter with the chaotic entity still clung to the air like static, but there was no time to dwell on it. Ahead lay their next challenge, a swirling nexus of energy at the heart of the abyss. This was their target, the source of the chaos that threatened to consume entire worlds. Zoker adjusted the ship's course, his expression unreadable as always. We are approaching the anomaly. Scans indicate it is a concentrated mass of pure entropy, beyond anything we have previously encountered. Sarah leaned closer to the view screen, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the energy vortex. It pulsated with an unsettling rhythm, its colors shifting in ways that defied logic. She could almost feel the wrongness of it, a deep-seated unease that made her skin crawl. How do we even begin to fight something like that? She murmured, more to herself than to Zoker. Conventional weapons are useless against it. Zoker responded, his voice tinged with a rare hint of frustration. It consumes energy, grows stronger with each attack. This is why we needed you, human. Your species thrives on unpredictability. You must devise a strategy that defies logic, one that even the chaos cannot anticipate. Sarah clenched her fists, feeling the weight of the mission pressing down on her. She had been brought here as a last resort, a wild card in a game where the stakes were life or death for entire civilizations. But the longer she stared at the swirling vortex, the more an idea began to take shape in her mind, a strategy born not from military tactics, but from something far more primal. What if we don't attack it directly? Sarah said slowly, her mind racing ahead. What if we use its own nature against it? Zoker's gaze flicked to her, his eyes narrowing. Explain. Sarah stood and began pacing the small cockpit, the gears in her mind turning. It feeds on energy, right? It grows stronger the more we fight it. But what if we starve it instead? Deprive it of the chaos it thrives on? Zoker tilted his head slightly, considering her words. How do you propose we achieve that? Sarah stopped pacing, turning to face him. By doing the opposite of what it expects. We create order, perfect, unyielding order. We stabilize the surrounding space, force it into a state of equilibrium. If we can neutralize the fluctuations, it might weaken or even destroy itself. Zoker remained silent for a moment, his expression inscrutable. Then, without a word, he began inputting commands into the ship's control panel. Sarah watched as the displays shifted, showing new calculations and energy readings. Your plan is unconventional, Zoker finally said, his tone laced with what could almost be approval. But it may work. We will use the ship's field generators to create a localized area of stability around the anomaly. As Zoker worked, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since this mission began, she felt like she was on the right track. But that hope was tempered by the knowledge that if they failed, there would be no second chances. This was their one shot to stop the chaos before it spread beyond the abyss. The ship trembled as Zoker engaged the field generators. A deep hum resonated through the hull, and Sarah watched as the energy vortex on the viewscreen began to slow, its erratic movements growing sluggish. The colors dulled, the once vibrant chaos dimming as the stabilization field took hold. It's working, Sarah whispered, hardly daring to believe it. But then, just as quickly as it had begun to weaken, the vortex flared to life, its energy doubling in intensity. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as the vortex lashed out with tendrils of raw entropy. Zoker struggled to keep the ship steady, his hands moving rapidly across the controls. It's resisting! Zoker shouted over the cacophony. The stabilization field is weakening. No, Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through the noise with a sudden clarity. We're giving it exactly what it wants. We're trying to impose order, but that's what it's fighting against. We need to overwhelm it with more chaos, unpredictable, unstructured chaos. Zoker glanced at her, his eyes widening as realization dawned. You mean? Shut off the field generators, Sarah ordered. And then overload them. Flood this entire area with raw energy, but in an unstructured, chaotic pattern. Give it more than it can handle. Zoker hesitated only for a fraction of a second before complying. The ship's systems roared to life, and Sarah braced herself as the generators were pushed to their limits. The energy field around the ship shattered, and in its place, a torrent of raw, chaotic energy surged outwards, enveloping the vortex. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The vortex convulsed, its form distorting as it tried to absorb the chaos, but the unstructured energy overwhelmed it. The vortex writhed and twisted, its shape collapsing in on itself as it was torn apart from within. In a final, blinding flash of light, the vortex imploded, leaving only the quiet hum of the ship's systems in its wake. Sarah exhaled a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They had done it. The heart of the abyss was no more. Zoker turned to her, a rare look of respect in his eyes. Your plan was effective, human. The chaos has been neutralized. But as Sarah gazed out at the now quiet expanse of space, she couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had come at a cost. They had destroyed the chaos, but they had also unleashed a new level of unpredictability into the universe, one that even she couldn't fully comprehend. And the real consequences of that choice were yet to be seen. The scout ship drifted silently through the aftermath of the abyss's destruction. The once turbulent space had settled into an eerie calm, with the massive vortex now nothing more than a distant memory. Sarah Reed and Zoker hovered over the control panel, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound breaking the silence. Sarah rubbed her temples, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. We did it, she said, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. The anomaly is gone. Zoker's eyes remained fixed on the monitors. The immediate threat has been neutralized. But the instability you've introduced may have unforeseen consequences. Sarah looked at the displays, watching the now stable region of space. What kind of consequences? Zoker's gaze was uncharacteristically intense. The abyss was a focal point of chaotic energy. With it gone, the surrounding regions could experience a ripple effect, potentially destabilizing nearby star systems. Sarah's heart sank. So, we've won a battle but might have started a new conflict? Yes, Zoker confirmed. Our actions may have set off a chain reaction. We need to assess the broader impact. The ship's communications console beeped, interrupting their conversation. A transmission from the Galactic Council flickered to life on the screen. Zelkar Scout Ship, this is Council Command. We've detected a massive energy disturbance in the nearby systems. We need a status report. Zoker tapped a few commands, and the holographic image of a stern-faced counselor appeared. Counselor Varnes, this is Zoker of the Zelkar. The abyss has been neutralized. However, we are detecting potential destabilization in adjacent star systems. Counselor Varnes's eyes narrowed. Your actions have caused a significant ripple effect. We need immediate data on the extent of this disruption. Sarah stepped forward. We'll conduct a scan and provide a detailed report. But we need to act fast to prevent any further damage. Agreed, Varnes replied. We're sending additional support. Keep us updated. The transmission ended, and Sarah turned to Zoker, determination replacing her earlier fatigue. We need to map the affected areas. If we can predict the patterns of destabilization, we might be able to mitigate the impact. Zoker nodded, his fingers flying over the controls. Initiating scans now. The ship's sensors extended outward, sending waves of energy through the surrounding space. The results were immediate and alarming. Regions once stable were now shifting unpredictably. Star systems were experiencing irregular gravitational fluctuations, and several planets were showing signs of atmospheric collapse. Sarah studied the data, her mind racing. We need to stabilize these systems quickly. If we can synchronize the energy fields of affected planets, we might restore some equilibrium. Zoker's expression was one of concentrated effort. It's a complex task, but it may be possible. We'll need to coordinate with the local systems and deploy stabilization beacons. Sarah nodded. Let's get to work. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah and Zoker worked tirelessly, coordinating with the Galactic Council and deploying stabilization beacons across the affected regions. The process was meticulous, requiring precise calculations and real-time adjustments. The ship's sensors and communication systems became a whirlwind of data and commands, each step critical to preventing further catastrophe. Just as they completed the last deployment, an alert sounded on the ship's console. A new energy signature had appeared, a massive, concentrated burst of energy coming from a previously stable star system. The signature matched the profile of the abyss's chaotic energy. "Not again," Sarah muttered, her face pale. "This energy signature is identical to what we faced before." Zoker's eyes widened. "It appears that the destruction of the abyss has caused a new focal point of instability to form. We need to investigate immediately." The ship accelerated towards the source of the energy signature, navigating through the now unstable space. As they approached, the ship's sensors detected a massive spatial distortion at the heart of the star system. It was a chaotic vortex similar to the one they had just destroyed, but even more intense. Sarah's grip tightened on the console. "We're dealing with a new epicenter of chaos. If we don't neutralize this quickly, the ripple effect could be catastrophic." Zoker's face was set in grim determination. "We must use the same strategy. Overwhelm the chaos with unpredictable energy patterns. But we must also be prepared for a stronger, more resistant entity." The ship moved into position, and Sarah began setting up the field generators once more. The process was intense and fraught with danger. The chaotic energy surged and twisted around them, attacking the ship's systems with relentless force. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice resolute. "We either stabilize this vortex or face an even greater disaster." With a final surge of energy, the ship's systems began to deploy the chaotic energy patterns. The vortex reacted violently, its form writhing and expanding. The ship rocked as the vortex lashed out, but Sarah and Zoker held their ground, their focus unwavering. The energy clash reached its peak, and then, as if pushed to its limits, the vortex began to collapse inward. The chaotic energy dissipated, leaving behind a void where the vortex had been. Sarah exhaled deeply, her body trembling from the exertion. "We did it! The vortex is gone." Zoker nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "The immediate threat has been neutralized once more. However, the balance of the universe remains fragile. We must remain vigilant." As the ship drifted through the now quiet space, Sarah looked out at the stars, a new understanding dawning on her. Their victory had come at a cost, but it had also forged a new path for humanity's role in the galaxy. They were no longer mere participants in the cosmic struggle. They were active agents, wielding their own form of chaos and order in a universe that demanded both. In the end, Sarah knew that their fight was far from over. The echoes of their victory would resonate across the stars, and they would need to be ready for whatever came next.